And now it's already lunchtime. The day's flying by. So we've got a really special presentation over lunch. This is a sponsored product theater by MedPro Financial. So if you've noticed in the upper corner of our webinar today, we've got their logo. Frank is going to join us and give us a little bit of information about his company and just some of the things that we can think about as healthcare professionals within the space, the financial space. So I'm really excited to have Frank join us. Frank and I have been friends through various business interests for several years now, and it's been a pleasure getting to know him. And I'm incredibly passionate about the importance of financial literacy, because if you look at data, one of the leading causes of burnout and certainly even mental health difficulties often is financial stress. And thankfully in healthcare, we have a lot of opportunities to make a fairly good wage. So I think a lot of times in healthcare, if we're having financial stress, it can certainly be education causing tons of debt. There can be various things in there. So it's not a one size fits all. But having some confidence in how we manage our finances, having someone in the room to help guide us through that, because very often finances are scary, it can be emotional. And if we have someone who's separate from us to be that third party, that adult in the room, it can really make a big difference. So with that, I will give it to you, Frank. I hope that was an adequate introduction that didn't say anything that was incorrect. We don't need the SEC coming after us or anything, but thank you, everyone, for joining us over lunch. I hope that you all have the opportunity to grab some food, get some takeout, whatever you need to do. And then over the lunch hour, we're going to turn it over to Frank, and he's going to give us a wonderful foundational financial planning session. So thank you, Frank, and it's all yours.
Yeah, appreciate that introduction, and go Bills. Big game this weekend. So yeah, no, I appreciate it. First time on Riverside, looks like I am good. So I'll appreciate everyone with the time here. So yeah, thank you for having me. And as a quick kind of caveat, my name is Frank Randall. I'm a financial advisor and founder of MedPro Financials. Today we're going to take a foundational financial planning session. Again, with these topics, probably could take 20, 30 minutes, on everything and drag it out. But my hope is that we'll cover some high-level topics, talk about some things to increase your financial literacy, your financial confidence, and have some time for questions at the end. So real quick caveat, again, my name is Frank. I founded MedPro Financials a couple years ago, mainly because of my wife. My wife is a nurse practitioner in the trauma department up here in Rochester. And I found myself surrounded by NPs, PAs, physicians, pharmacists. And what I come to find out is, this is a group that is committed to education. They're committed to their craft. They're balancing work. My wife and I, we have 2 little kids, so that's crazy in and of its own. And over the past couple of years, we've made a number of different partnerships with associations. And at the end of the day, if our team can help reduce some of the financial stress that may happen in the medical space, you can live a better and more complete life. So, we'll jump in, and probably 30 to 40 minutes max. So this is a rhetorical question, but as I'm talking through it, I want you to think about it. What has your experience been with financial planning? Oftentimes, people tell us, they may have worked with someone at their job, or maybe they have a support system with their family or significant other, or maybe they met with someone, 1 or 2 times, years ago. But what we've found is that most of the time when we look at traditional financial planning, we look at some common themes that people tend to tell us they struggle with. And the first is disorganization, right? People tend to be financially disorganized, and it's kind of like that junk drawer analogy, right? Like around the corner in my kitchen, there's the junk drawer with, stamps, envelopes, pens, tape, all the things. And you just shut the drawer, don't look at it. We find that sometimes people treat their finances the same way, where they just tend to shove it all away, not look at it, and it creates some financial stress. So, we see that as a main concern. We also see lack of prioritization. Oftentimes we'll work with medical professionals, and maybe they're doing all the right stuff, but sometimes it can be out of order or not optimized efficiently, right? So again, we want to talk about that. And the third pitfall that we see oftentimes is this challenge of chasing rate of return. So what does that mean? That just means the only thing you're concerned about is what your money is earning in the market, for example. I would argue that the amount of money you save is more important than what you get in the stock market because you can control what you save. And so when we look at the world of financial stuff, for lack of a better term, there's many different variables, right? Cost of living, tax rates, Social Security, college costs, unexpected events, could be good or bad unexpected life events. And I'll argue that the only two things that we have some degree of control over is going to be protection and cash flow. So real quick to define that, protection is looking at all of the threats that could put your goals at risk. Things like, getting sued, getting sick, passing away, being unemployed for an extended period of time. And so we'll talk about those threats and how do we protect against them. And secondly, cash flow. Cash flow is understanding things like, where do we invest our money? Should we put money in traditional or Roth buckets? Should we make extra payments on our student loans? How do we balance short-term goals and long-term goals? And so cash flow truly is, the foundation from a financial planning perspective. And protection are going to be addressing all of those threats that exist. So one of the first things I share is, get financially organized. So this is a tool that we use, and we'll make this tool available complimentary to anyone interested. But the first step is to take your whole financial world and put it in one spot. I sometimes make corny kind of medical analogies, but I think I may have a pass. But this is kind of like a patient assessment almost, if you will, right? If someone's coming to me with symptoms of, hey, Frank, I'm really concerned about my student loans, or I want to be investing more for the future. Those are absolutely important, and we'll talk about them. But I really need to look at all of the areas in their financial world, right? What do they make? What happens if they get sued? What's their real estate situation look like? What's their tax liability look like? And so it's really important to understand these rules or order of operations, if you will. And that first one, again, is protect your todays. Secondly, we'll talk about how do we become a world-class saver, right? That's somebody who's saving at an optimal level. Thirdly, we'll talk about liquidity. Liquidity is the concept of access to your money, right? If somebody has the ability to save 20% and they put it all in a retirement account, that could put some stress on their short-term goals, right? So there's some balance there. And lastly, understanding, eliminating debt, good debt, bad debt, managing taxes, student loan forgiveness. How do we play on that side of the coin? So, how does your income stop? Generally speaking, there are three ways that can really disrupt someone's income. The first is going to be a loss of a job. Second is an illness or an injury. And third is death. And so really the three ways that we can protect against these threats: one, loss of a job, having a robust emergency fund, and having a robust access to liquidity, having money that is accessible in a moment's notice if for some reason there is a extended period of time from an unemployment standpoint. Illness and injury, it's looking at your group benefits through work, understanding things like disability insurance, long-term care coverage, and really beginning to answer the question, if you were to miss work for 4 years, how would the rent, utilities, and groceries get paid? And then lastly, death, which is looking at, how do we pass on money to the next generation in the most tax efficient way possible, if that's something that's important to you. So the reason why we look at protection first is because I will argue that the strongest asset that anyone here or listening owns is not your retirement account. It's not your house. It's your income. Your income and your ability to produce is the strongest asset on your balance sheet. So if we take a 37-year-old making $165,000 a year, they're realistically going to earn, at least $8.2 million more the rest of their career, and probably more. Now, they don't get to keep all that money, right? Lifestyle, taxes, family, all of the things, but it's a lot of income. And so when we look at that income, that's the number we're going to keep in mind. And there's typically 4 domains of protection I'd like everyone to kind of consider, and some of these may be applicable now, some down the road. But this is what we commonly see. So to take a 2-minute detour here, life insurance, disability insurance, liability coverage, and then legal docs. So in the life insurance space, we typically see people with 1 to 2 times their income, and that's what most employers will give. We'll talk about in a minute why that's red. Disability insurance, most hospitals or employers will offer some type of long-term disability insurance, but usually it's a fraction of what really we should have. Oftentimes there's tax consequences as well. Liability coverage. So this is probably the easiest thing to change today in your financial plan. So let's say, for example, we have someone who owns a house and they have a car, right? They're going to typically have car insurance and homeowners insurance. So let's say this person is driving home from work, they get into an accident and they hit a 30-year-old, and that 30-year-old was making $70,000 a year, and he's no longer able to work. It's reasonable that that person is going to sue you, right? Now, in that example, he makes $70,000 a year. Maybe he can't work for 10 years, right? It's reasonable he would sue you for at least $700,000, 70 times 10. In that example, Geico, State Farm, whoever your car insurance company is, will cut that person a check for $200,000-$300,000 max. But that still leaves a $400,000 to $600,000 liability on your balance sheet that they could come after you for. And oftentimes, I try to be an optimist, but if somebody discovers that you're, a medical professional, they may have ulterior motives to try and come after you for money. So a real easy thing that everybody can do is, talk to the person who got you set up with your car insurance and homeowners insurance and ask them to add what's called an umbrella policy. Usually these things are like $15, $20 a month, and you can get $1 million of extra coverage just in case of some sort of frivolous lawsuit. And then lastly, wills and trusts. Wills and trusts are going to be more applicable, for people that have kids or property. And, as a parent of 2, I had to have a conversation with my wife, and the conversation was, Katie, if both of us were to pass away at the same time, who do we want to raise the kids? Right? And that needs to be documented somewhere. And so, again, these are not the fun, interesting parts of financial planning. I would argue, the investments and the savings and the student loan forgiveness, super important, super important. So maybe I'll take another 2 to 5 minutes or so here and just finish up some things to be aware of in the protection space. So in the life insurance space, just as a caveat, there's a maximum amount of life insurance somebody can get. And when we talk about life insurance, there's really 2 things to consider. One would be, what is the right amount of coverage someone should have? And secondly, what is the right type? So if you notice on the left, or my left, maybe you're right, these are the guidelines as to how much coverage someone could apply for. So, I could not go to an insurance company and ask for $300 million of life insurance. They would say, Frank, you're not worth that much money, right? So, essentially they take your income and they multiply it by a factor of working years you have left, and that's the maximum amount you're eligible for. Now, in my opinion, from a life insurance standpoint, and I'm just using myself and my 2 kids as a frame of reference, if I were to pass away, all of the years of income that it would have been flowing into our household is now gone, right? So that's why I unapologetically believe that most people are underinsured, and most people have, 1 or 2 times their salary, and the thought process is, they'll pay off the mortgage, take off the student loans, don't have to burden my spouse with those bills. But I would argue all of the years of income that are no longer in the household are going to make for an uncomfortable experience. So that's kind of the thought on the amount of coverage. We typically recommend, clients to have closer to that maximum amount, mainly because we're ensuring that income over time. And so again, 90 seconds here, what are the different types of life insurances? There's two typically different types. They both do two different things. In the spirit of education, term insurance is what most people are familiar with. Term insurance is where you buy life insurance. It's good for a term, 15 years, 20 years. And if you pass away within that window, someone else gets a check. If you pass away after that term insurance expires, there's nothing left to the beneficiary. And so, term insurance, one of the best things about term insurance is that it's very cheap, typically speaking. And the reason why term insurance is so cheap is not because it's better or worse, but it's because it typically doesn't pay out. 98% of the time, term insurance does not pay out, right? Because people tend to live long, healthy lives. So that's kind of why it's cheaper. Certainly serves a purpose, but it will expire at some point. And then on the other side of the coin, there's permanent coverage that's good for your whole life. These types of life insurance policies never expire. There will 100% with whole life insurance be a death benefit to your family or whomever you designate your beneficiary at some point. Additionally, in some of these policies, they function like a savings account. So there are cash values that are building up inside that clients can use for paying off credit cards, supplementing retirement, buying a car. So it just becomes an alternative or an additional place to save. It's not an investment. It's an insurance product that has some savings built inside of it. So again, those are the two different types of life insurances. And I would argue that life insurance is a want. It's not a need. You don't need life insurance. If you want it, that's great. But I would argue disability insurance is something all medical professionals need. Because your income is what you use to power your goals, to achieve, peace of mind that you want. And if that income gets disrupted, it changes everything. So a couple quick stats here. Excuse me. More than 25% of people will suffer a disability in their working career. And the average disability is about 2.5 years in length. And most disabilities are actually an illness, right? It's not like a workplace hazard. And most of the medical professionals I work with aren't working in dangerous conditions typically. So it's usually some sort of disorder or something that keeps you out of work. And so what are the different types? So again, and a lot of times when we work with, medical professionals, they'll come to us and say, here are the two job offers that I have. Like, what are your thoughts on the benefits? And we'll have this conversation. And on the group side, the group disability insurance typically is a taxable benefit. So if your employer gives you long-term disability insurance where you're not paying for it, just an employee perk, that's great because you don't have to pay for it. But that means if you ever did have to file a claim, the benefit would be taxable. Additionally, in the group insurance, it's not really that customizable. And we'll talk about definitions in a second on how important that is in the medical space. But 9.5 times out of 10, it typically makes sense to take as much of the group insurance as you can through work and then supplement with individual coverage. The individual coverage typically has it does have a tax-free benefit because you're paying for your premiums out of pocket. And the two other things that are really important about individual disability coverage is one, it's portable. So if you change careers, whether you go from the clinician role to something else, or you change hospital systems, or you get a raise, right? Oftentimes when you change jobs, you can't take your prior disability insurance with you, right? It stays at the company. So having disability insurance that you own, that you can take with you from job to job is really important, especially because we as people tend to get less healthy as we get older. So it's really important to get these when you're young and healthy from a insurability standpoint. And the last thing on disability is the definition. So if there's anything this group gets out of today's presentation, listening now or later, it's this. It's the definition of your long-term disability insurance. Especially for medical professionals, it is so important because under a standard disability definition, typically we call this any occupation, The example is, we've got Dr. Smith here. She's a surgeon. She becomes disabled and she can no longer do her job, right? Maybe she loses the ability to use her hands, or maybe she suffers some sort of disability where she can still live a life, but she can't work in the same capacity. Well, if Dr. Smith decides to go teach at a university or get a second job, under a standard definition, they will actually stop paying for the benefit because the insurance company is going to say, well, you're healthy enough to work. Why were we going to pay you a claim? You're healthy. Where if you have a true own occupation definition, what that says is if Dr. Smith is a surgeon and she can no longer work in her duties as a surgeon, but she's healthy enough to work someplace else, she can work the second job and still receive the benefit. And so there's only a handful, in my opinion, a handful of insurance carriers that have these strong definitions. And again, not all companies are created equal. You have to look at claims histories. You have to look at definitions. But again, super important. As one of the sponsors here, that's one of the work that our team does pretty passionately in the disability space. And we'll break this up into two sections, and I don't know if this is going to be good or bad. So maybe Mike, you can let me know. But I'll pause if there's any questions on anything in the protection insurance space before we talk about cash flow, savings, student loans, and all the other stuff.
Perfect. Let's take a peek at the chat and see what we've got then. All right. So excellent. So no, I don't have any questions in the chat right now, but we've got several comments, including this one, which I'm going to put up for the group to see. All right, so we've got disability is so important. Currently have a hand tendon injury and surgery keeping me out of the OR. I'm on short term, but may need to utilize my individual long-term policy. So happy. Can I scroll down here? No. So happy to have advice to purchase individual long-term insurance years ago. Great information. Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that, Dan.
Yeah.
Excellent. So as Frank said, let's pause just for a minute in case there's any questions that come in specifically about this session or section before Frank moves on. And here we go. So what is your opinion on 529 accounts and other means for college savings? Oh, Chris, I'm so glad you asked that because I have made the conscious decision. I don't know if I told you this, Frank. I am not saving for college for my kids. They are on their own. So maybe they won't be smart enough for college and it'll work out okay. Yeah. But I have not saved for college. So Frank, I'm also interested to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, great question. So I'll kind of share some high level of the three, then I'll share with what I do, what me and my wife do for our kids. So 529s, there's tax-free benefits. The way those accounts work is you contribute to an account, the monies get invested, and as long as the child uses those funds for qualifying educational expenses, there's no tax liability. There was a law that was passed a couple years ago called the Secure Act 2.0 that now says if you've had a 529 plan that's been open for 15 years, you can move those dollars into a Roth IRA for the child. It just has to have been open for 15 years. So you can't do that for like a 12-year-old. So that's interesting. In my opinion, I'm all about options. So I don't know what college is going to look like in 16 years for my kids. It may be free, maybe. They may want to start a business, get married, and I personally don't do 529 plans because I think there are some restrictions there, and those accounts aren't as safe as people think. In 2022, when stocks and bonds went down, a lot of 529 accounts lost value, and that was kind of a rude awakening for people. So to summarize, there's three things that I would say you could do. The 529 we talked about. You could also look into what's called an UTMA account, a UTMA account. It's just a brokerage account where the child is the account owner and the parent is the custodian. And in that account, you can invest in anything, mutual funds, ETFs, stocks. So it's a normal investment account. There are some tax benefits to the child, but there's no, restrictions on how they use it. And then also using permanent life insurance as a savings vehicle for children, I think is really powerful because we can use the cash in these policies to fund college. And by the way, the cash in the life insurance policies doesn't go to FAFSA, so it's not reported as a FAFSA number. So again, what we did is we have the UTMA account, so we invest aggressively in some mutual funds, and we do the life insurance, so we're balancing risk and protection. That's what we do. So again, but great question.
Excellent. All right. So here we go from Desiree. I want to offer insurance for disability, but they said we have to be in business for 2 years before we offer it to staff.
As a practitioner, I'm assuming is that context, Desiree?
Yes. So I'll jump in there because Desiree's a friend. So Desiree just started her own telemedicine psychiatry practice.
Awesome. I would be curious if that's short-term or long-term disability. I don't know if you would know, Desiree, or can chime in, but yeah, I don't think that's necessarily the case. I'd be curious how many potential participants. So usually if a group has, I forget the number offhand, maybe it's 5 or 6 people that would participate, the barrier to entry is a lot lower. So I'd have to be curious if it's just you, if it's other employees, but that maybe with that carrier specifically, but.
Okay. Another question here from Jasmine. So should we specifically ask for own occupation coverage?
Yeah, and so this is going to be in the individual space, because on the group side you can't ask. You're going to just get whatever what they set up, right? On the individual side, yeah, it's own occupation or true own occupation are the terms you want to use. And again, not every carrier offers that, and the way you customize disability insurance is not the same from a car insurance standpoint. Car insurance, you call up, the agent, they give you a quote. With disability, you really want to work with someone who knows how to build policies, because there's many different riders and features to build.
All right. What do you recommend for someone that owns her own practice?
First off, congrats. Love that. And so if it's a solo practice, one of the things to consider, again, all of these insurances are certainly applicable. If there's a partner, one of the things to consider is what we call buy-sell planning. So let's say, for example, Mike and I are in business together, and Mike and I love each other, but I happen to pass away. The question is, does Mike want to be in business with my wife? He may love my wife, but my share of my business goes to my wife in that example, unless the business owns life insurance on each other. And so if I were to pass away, and the business is paying the life insurance premiums, if I pass away, that policy goes to Mike. He buys out my share of the business, and now he doesn't have to work with Katie. So again, if there are partners in a practice, that's called buy-sell planning, really important. If it's an individual, it's almost the same thing from what we're talking about today. But yeah, hopefully that answers that question. Great question.
I'm a little concerned. It sounds like your wife and I are conspiring to rub you out.
No doubt. That's funny.
You better watch behind your back.
That's good.
All right. Let me see. This is a long one. So, it's not going to come up. Okay. So I'm going to just have to, there we go. Do you have recommendations for small business owners for investing for a savings vehicle for your children that may actually improve your tax burden, i.e. paying children as employees under a different plan?
Yeah, I mean, the tricky thing with paying children's employees is you technically have to prove it in some capacity. So a really common thing is marketing, strategies or whatnot, and that can help funnel, Roth IRA type dollars to the children. So that's the thing. Now, I'm not a tax professional. You'd have to get audited to get caught. I'm not, advocating to do anything wrong. But again, that's typically how that works. From a tax,
and we have, just to jump in, Frank, tomorrow we have Nick. I think it's tomorrow. Nick Kropp is coming on to talk about 1099 work.
Yeah.
But hopefully also we'll have an opportunity where we can also tackle maybe some of these accounting for small business owner questions,
No
since a lot of these questions have been really focused on small business ownership. So we'll even try and remember to put that question for Nick tomorrow too.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I'd say, me and my team, we're almost like general practitioners. We're going to talk about, the big picture, but we would obviously bring in tax specialists for individual cases, because it's about tax planning for the future, which is kind of what our team does. but also tax planning for today, which is what typically an accountant or a CPA would do.
All right, we got one more question here.
Cool.
Can you give an idea of a monthly premium for an own occupation plan for PAs?
Love that question. So for disability insurance, they're going to look at your age, your health, your gender, and your job duties, right? So generally speaking, the younger you are, cheaper it is. Equal male and female, typically females are a little bit cheaper for premium wise. They'll look at your job duties, and also some insurance carriers will offer discounts regarding how high of your education was. There are also some programs in hospital systems called guaranteed standard issue. So some hospital systems that we work with have programs where PAs, residents or whatnot, can get disability insurance without even applying for a medical. We've negotiated group deals for them. But to answer your question for premium, it's really going to depend on the amount of income you want to protect, right? So if you want to have a policy that would pay out $1,000 a month if you get disabled, that could be $20 a month. If you're looking at a policy that's going to pay out $6,000 a year, $6,000 a month, that may be closer to $150. But a good benchmark, and I'll end it with this, a good benchmark is 1 to 2% of your income is an acceptable range of what premium should cost. So if you make $120 a year, $1,200 would be like a good deal. $1,800 reasonable. So
excellent. So that seems to be all of the questions for right. Oh, wait.
Awesome.
Oh, here we go. They just keep rolling in. So just cut me off, Frank, at some point. If you want to keep moving on to the other part of your presentation, cut me off. But
good.
As long as the questions are coming, let's keep rattling them off here. So what are some reputable life insurance companies, and do you recommend shopping around?
Yes. So this is just my opinion, not an endorsement of any company or whatnot. Typically in the life insurance space, the first question would be is what type of life insurance would you be looking for? I mean, term insurance is pretty cheap no matter where you go. Permanent coverage like whole life insurance, for example, you would want to stick with what's called a mutual insurance company. The big 4 or 5 companies are Guardian, Northwestern Mutual, New York Life, Mass Mutual, Penn Mutual. Those 5 tend to have a strong history of paying out claims, giving their clients dividends when you own a policy. But the most important thing is to work with someone that knows the carriers they're working with, right? Knows how to build a policy, someone that you can call to handle claims. I've unfortunately had to deliver death claims before, and you want to make sure you're working with someone that handles that side of it. But yeah, I would say that probably is my answer. Depends on what you're looking for, but those 4 or 5 companies tend to stand out from a permanent standpoint.
Excellent. All right, now we're through the questions.
Cool. I wasn't sure if I wanted to. I wasn't sure I wanted to pause or not, but that was great. I appreciate it.
That was wonderful. So I'm going to jump back off camera, and then at the end, I can jump back on if there's more questions.
Cool. Awesome. So when we talk about investments, before we get into the world of investments, I want to talk about savings real quick. So this is one of my favorite charts. This is a history of the U.S. personal household savings rate. And maybe the last 30 years or so, I would argue that the average American saves about, 4 to 7% of their income. Obviously, the 2 blips were COVID. Now, COVID didn't teach people how to save. You just couldn't spend your money, right? So ignore that anomaly. But typically, people aren't good savers. I think they're not good savers because of how cash flow moves in the world, how people absorb lifestyle increases, right? So again, I'm thinking of a client I'm working with. He's a pharmacist, young pharmacist, fresh out of school, and we're talking about building a savings and investment plan now before lifestyle creep happens, like kids, mortgage, household, other things. So again, it's important to kind of grab this early, and if you're a little farther in your career, we'll talk about how we flip the order in a second. So what is a world-class saver? So a world-class saver is somebody that saves 15 to 20% of their income. But if we look at this, this client making $165,000 a year, over the next 30 years of his working career, he's going to again earn $9.5 million. Now, he doesn't get to keep it all. Lifestyle, taxes, kids, dance, swimming, all the things my daughter does. But let's look at an average person. An average person saves 6% of their income. Over that 30-year window, they only end up holding on to about $550,000. The rest of their dollars fall off their balance sheet, whether it's taxes, lifestyle, etc. And again, we're not talking about investing yet. We will. But that's what an average American is saving. And if we look what's optimal, so again, average 6% savings rate, $500,000. Saving at an optimal level, it's a $1.3 million delta difference. The amount that we're saving is significantly more important than the interest rate that you get, in my opinion. And then when you take these savings dollars and begin to invest them, let's say this client is investing these dollars at a 4% rate of return, very conservative. Now they're sitting on $3.2 million. And so the order, save first. Then, in my opinion at least, when someone's savings habits are proven and they're able to build up enough liquidity and they have enough of a buffer, then we begin to go talk about how do we invest. But too many people, in my opinion, invest first to try and get rich and then try and save after. I really think it should be flipped. Because this is how cash flow works for most people. You get paid, money goes to your checking account, you live your life, then you try to save. This is a typical style. Where I would argue it makes more sense to introduce what we call a wealth building account. Think of it like an industry term would be a brokerage account. But I would argue that the most important or impactful thing we found is opening up a brokerage account for clients and then direct depositing 15% of their paycheck into that account. The other 5% maybe goes to their 403b. We take that other 15%, direct deposit it, and then automatically invest that in a separate brokerage account. Because if we prevent those dollars from getting to the client's bank account, they're not going to consume them, right? So that's just a small switch that I believe is really impactful. And when we talk about where to save, that's this concept of liquidity. So liquidity means access to money. And typically, we see clients who come to us and they have money typically in two places. The bank, because it's easy to get, but it doesn't really grow. Or in a retirement account, because it grows, but it's not easy to get. Well, there's many, many other places to put dollars that sometimes make sense from a financial plan. And the big takeaway here that I want to leave with the group is getting liquid and having money for emergencies and opportunities is hyper important, because if all of our dollars are in a retirement account and there's an emergency, it's difficult to get, and sometimes there's penalties to that. So again, that's the concept of liquidity. And we also want to talk about, taxes. So again, I'm not a, tax professional. We have people coming on for that, but we do talk about where do we put buckets for future tax planning. So generally speaking, in the spirit of education, on the fully taxable side, these are going to be traditional retirement accounts, traditional 401ks, 403bs, IRAs, pensions, and all those 403, 401k, 403b, those letters, essentially it's who your employer is. For the business owners, it could be SEP IRAs, different type of accounts. And typically all of the dollars that go into this bucket, you will not pay any taxes today. They grow tax-free, and then you pay taxes when you take money out. The partially taxable is going to be dollars that we get taxed on an ongoing basis, right? These are called capital gains taxes. So if you make money in the market and you sell a little bit today, you got to pay a little tax. And then lastly, the non-taxable are going to be things like HSAs, Roth IRAs, permanent life insurance, Roth 401ks. These all have dollars that are building up that have been taxed today, they grow tax-free, and then you never have to pay taxes again. So what's better? It depends. Depends on your situation. But this is a chart of taxes in this country the last 100 and some odd years. And in my opinion, again, I'm 36. I feel like in my working career, it's more likely that taxes are going to go up than go down. So I personally am going more into the Roth buckets because I'd rather pay the taxes today. But again, every situation is unique. So to make sure we grab everything, I encourage clients to look at their dollars in this what we call bucket strategy. And we call it the 3 T's. The first one is time, right? So if you're putting money in an account, we have to understand what is the time frame to reach that goal. Like, we're not going to use a savings account to save for my daughter's, college. I'm not going to use a retirement account to save for the car we're going to get next year. So understand time. The second T is understand taxes. Are these taxable dollars, tax-free, tax later, tax now? Then thirdly, we want to look at threats, meaning, do we want to take market risk? And oftentimes people, in my opinion, get too aggressively into investing. And I think it's important to have money in safe buckets just to make sure we're not forced to only use one type of asset. So again, where do returns come from? High level, there's 4 principles to investing, in our opinion. One is own stocks. Gives you the best chance for rate of return. And then offset risk with fixed income. Fixed income is going to be things like bonds, treasury bills, CDs, life insurances, savings accounts, things that don't serve a primary purpose of earning money, but they help reduce overall portfolio risk. Second principle is diversify. So a lot of times we see clients with portfolio A where maybe they've started investing on their own and they own 4 or 5 different funds, but oftentimes those funds own the same type of companies, and that's what we call portfolio overlap. We want to make sure that we're getting exposure to big companies, small companies, American companies, international companies, profitable companies, companies with potential growth. So it's important to understand that even if you own 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 different funds in a portfolio, there could be overlap. Third principle is rebalance. For the sake of time, essentially what this means is as we get older, we should be adjusting what percentages our dollars are in. And the fourth principle, which is my favorite, is behave. Behaving in the sense of not getting scared, not following the herd, turning the news off at times. Because what we find is that people make emotional and irrational decisions when they see something on the news or social media, and it leads to some pain down the road, whether it's lost opportunity because they took their money out, or whether they bought in something too high. So that's why it's important. Again, I'm a financial advisor, and I always like to share that Vanguard came out with a study 3 or 4 years ago, and Vanguard study said people who work with a financial advisor typically see 2 to 3% higher returns in their portfolio, not because the financial advisor picks better investments, but because we help people behave, right? So that's why I encourage people to tap a professional really for the behavior. Couple more things here, probably 5 or 6 more minutes that we can wrap up for questions. Distributing wealth, accumulating wealth. So what I'm looking at here is traditional retirement planning, I think, is flawed. I think traditional retirement planning is where people put all of their dollars into traditional buckets, and it could lead to more taxes. It can lead to increased stock market risk. And I love this mountain chart because at some point, we are all going to go over the mountain where we switch from our accumulation phase, which is now, I'm accumulating dollars. Then at some point, I'm going to begin to go down the mountain, which is when I'm going to start spending all of the assets I've created. And I'm no mountain climber, but I would probably suggest that sometimes going down the mountain is harder than going up, right? You're exhausted. The the implications of a slip and fall are much more powerful going down than going up. And so when we look at all of these threats and things that can happen, in the accumulation phase, dying too soon is a risk, but in distribution, you could live too long. Getting sick now will really affect your income. Getting sick in retirement, it crushes your assets when you look at some of the long-term care and in-home aid costs. Volatility, inflation, right? So there's a myriad of different concerns that we have to adjust with. And from a retirement planning standpoint, the last thing I want to share is a case study of brother A and brother B, right? So person A retires in 1995. He or she goes into retirement with $1 million, feeling great. This person timed it perfectly because his retirement account is still invested in the market. They're taking out $80,000 a year to live their dream retirement. And at the end of those 5 years, they actually have more money than when they retired. The second person got a little unlucky. He went to retire in a period where they had 2 or 3 years to start in the negative. And after 5 years, this person only has $500,000 left. And this person's going back to work. This person is changing their retirement goals and dreams, right? So the solution to this, in my opinion, is certainly have money in the market, but it's really important to have money outside of the market, whether it's in, real estate, bonds, insurances, savings, other types of things that can help protect your market assets. And so I'm going to take 3 more slides and hit on some high-level student loan stocks. I know that's really popular. Not sure, if we have time for all that, but super quick. There's federal and private loans. What I wanted to talk about are the refinance and forgiveness landscape. So private loans are loans that you open with a bank or an online bank or institution. Typically, these rates can be refinanced at no extra cost. And one of the things I'll encourage everyone is if you have a private student loan that has an interest rate over 9 or 10%, you should explore refinancing that. Interest rates are, I'd say, in the 5 to 8.5% range. And the benefit of refinancing is twofold. You can either continue to make the same payment you are now, but pay the loan down faster because more of the principal is getting paid off. Or if you have to buy yourself some time, you can extend the loan a little bit, lower your monthly payment, but you can always make extra payments. You don't have to, if you refinance a loan to a 15-year student loan, you don't have to take the full 15 years, but it does buy you some cash flow. And then the last thing is the public student loan forgiveness program. So, my team is partnered with a couple of different companies that help in this space, but at a high level, there is a path to forgiveness for those that are working for qualifying institutions. Those would be, nonprofit institutions, university systems. You have to have 10 years of payments, 120 qualifying payments. Those payments don't have to be in order. You do 4 years, go private, come back and do 6. And you also have to be in what's called an income-driven plan. Unfortunately, right now, nobody can get into any income-driven plans. There's a lawsuit in July of last year, so nobody can enroll in these plans yet. But hopefully that's changing soon. But if you see yourself working for an institution that, qualifies as an income-driven institution, a nonprofit, I would argue it makes sense to enroll, make those minimum payments, and just try and disassociate from the student loan balance because there is a path to forgiveness. You just have to be on top of the paperwork and make sure you submit your income every year. Sidebar, there are other companies our team works with to help facilitate that, but always open to share those updates as they come through. And so last thing, I'll pause, open up for questions in a second, but on your screen you see 2 things. Next to my face is a QR code right to my website, MedPro Financials. There's everything we talked about for business owners, for individuals, from our philosophy. There's a lot of resources there. Then on the right is a QR code for a complimentary financial scorecard, you have to click a button that says share this with Frank. So by default, I don't see anything. So I would encourage, if anyone wants any feedback on their financial plan, scan that QR code, go through the app, get that complimentary feedback. And if you want to share that information with me to connect, certainly can. Otherwise, it's free financial planning to understand like where you are according to kind of those industry standards and benchmarks. So it's a lot. Try to jam it all in 50 minutes. So hopefully, that made sense. But yeah, that's what I got.
Thank you, Frank. I'm all about trying to jam as much in as possible. I think it's great and hopefully is helpful for everyone that's listening or watching. So in the chat, I just put a link in addition to the QR code. Frank has also shared with me a survey. It's just, I'm looking at it right now, 4 quick questions. And the ask on our end is if you attended this, if you enjoyed it, but even if you didn't enjoy it, get on there and click that survey. It's very helpful for Frank as he's trying to figure out what financial topics are of the greatest need for us healthcare professionals. Obviously, his role is such where he wants to not only prioritize education, but make sure that he's addressing and meeting people where they need the assistance. So just take that quick survey, very quick. I'm doing it right now, just 4 questions, and that'll be very helpful for Frank. All right, Frank, we've got 9 minutes. So I think I'm looking right now to see if we've got some questions here. And let's start with one right here. Are there some long-term care insurance companies that you can recommend?
So there's the long-term insurance, like standalone long-term care insurance, to me, I think is really expensive. I think a lot of times we're running into massive claims histories right now. So the trend that I'm seeing is people adding long-term care features inside of a life insurance policy. Those tend to be a little more cost effective than just a standalone long-term care policy. A lot of people took out those long-term care policies in the 80s and their premiums are going up and they're paying out massive claims right now. So I would actually encourage you to look in the life insurance space. You can do like hybrid life insurance / long-term care. So yeah, hopefully that answers. I mean, companies, happy to connect offline. Naming companies publicly, not ideally supposed to, but happy to share some ideas offline.
Yeah, lots of these conversations I think end up being it depends type of answers. So certainly offline one-on-one conversations are going to be ideal. And I know, Frank, you've been very generous with your time with me. I am not a client of Frank's, probably intentionally, right? As we continue to collaborate on these projects, it's probably good to keep personal and business separate, but you've been incredible just in our conversations of being able to really provide a lot of education or point me in the right direction. So I'm looking in the chat. I'm waiting if any other questions come in. But since we do have 7 minutes, I have a question for you, Frank. I'm a bit of a nerd and I like to read a lot. And I love good financial books that can help improve financial literacy. So I'd love to get your thoughts. Oh, I don't know if you have any. Look at that. It's like we planted this question. So Frank, what would you recommend if there's someone watching this that maybe is a big Audible person or loves to read at night? Is there any books that are a great introductory financial literacy that you would want to start off with?
Yeah, so this is a book I'm going through now. No affiliation with this book, but The Wealth Money Can't Buy. Robin Sharma.
Which I haven't read, so I'm ordering it right now.
Yeah. Use my code in the link. I'm just kidding. I don't have a code. When it comes to money, there's it's best to learn from others, from mistakes, from wins, but like you mentioned, everything is personal, but I think it's really important to just be a learner and grab information from different, people. And, that's a great book. I'm going through that one. I got a couple back here, but that's a good one. I like, it's not a money book, but I love The Power of One More by Ed Mylett. It's like more like a motivational development book. That to me is like one of my favorites. But
I'm going to throw in mine here. Not that I'm a financial expert, but the book that I but that I recommend to people anytime we have these types of conversations is The Psychology of Money. It's one of my favorites, and it talks a lot about the human behavior. And so, of course, I work in psychiatry, so this is an area of interest of me. But it talks a lot about the behaviors and emotions that go into money and why we make decisions. And one of the big thrusts of it is that a lot of our financial decisions are made based on fear or greed. And really, the best financial management occurs, I think you talked about it to a good amount, that when we're able to remove those emotions from the decision making, but that's easier said than done. If the stock market goes down 10%, everybody freaks out. I don't look at it as, oh my gosh, look, everything's on sale, I should buy more, but rather I'm worrying if I'm going to lose my house.
Yeah.
So the Psychology of Money is a great book by Morgan Housel. I love that one, but once again, I'm taking a little bit more of a mental health approach where I like the intermix of the psychology side of it too. So I've got a couple questions that are coming in. One is Jasmine said, can you repeat that, please? So I believe that is in reference to the book. So Frank, can you just put that
Yeah.
book up and give
The
it one
wealth
more
money
time?
can't buy.
Perfect. All right. And Betsy says here, how to maximize employee match programs. What a great question, Betsy.
Yeah, so one thing to keep in mind is oftentimes many employers don't give a match for their first year or two right off the bat. So sometimes I'll encourage a client, if you're not even getting a match, it probably can make sense to take those dollars and invest them in another retirement account on your own or a normal investment account. Because if there's no match, but to maximize the match, I would say you have to understand how the company does it. My wife works for a hospital up here, and they do 6% on the first 60,000, then they do another percent on the next batch. But typically, I say the minimum to get the match is always a no-brainer. That should be like non-negotiable. And then if there's extra dollars to invest elsewhere, I would go back to that concept of liquidity and ask the question, does it make sense to put that extra 10% in a retirement account or maybe in a short-term investment account that is a little more less restrictive? So, that to me would be my point, is minimum to get the match, then explore other areas on your balance sheet to fill out before you go back to the 401k.
Perfect. All right. We've got 3 minutes, Frank. So I'm going to, we have people coming into, all right, 3 minutes left. So I'm going to do one more question, even though they're still rolling in. So what are some financial steps to take during your first year working as a new grad PA?
Awesome. Well, congrats. Starting working. That's amazing. And I would say the first step would be is understand your cash flow, where you are today. So, if someone's living at home or they have an apartment. So first create the awareness around what the fixed expenses, variable expenses are, and then identify what capacity you have to save. And I would encourage new grads to save aggressively now and get those psychological habits like ingrained in you to say it's a non-negotiable that 15% of your pay is going somewhere outside of your bank account. That's a first year tip. And the other two would be get the long-term disability insurance as an individual policy outside of work. And if you work for a qualifying institution, explore student loan, the PSLF program.
Wonderful. All right. And I've got here just a comment, but I'm going to throw it in because we have 2 minutes. So Dan says here, not affiliated, but White Coat Investor has great podcast free for initial self-education of healthcare providers. So yeah, I think that's really one of the big takeaways from this is, Frank, I'm so thankful for all the information you gave. And there are a lot of resources out there. So anyone that is interested in learning more, I do encourage you, reach out to Frank. He's been a wonderful friend of ours in terms of making sure that we're prioritizing financial education, but also there's a lot of different great resources out there, whether it's books or podcasts. The White Coat Investor puts out a lot of stuff that is very healthcare focused. So I believe strongly that the more that we can do to improve financial literacy, that helps reduce burnout. It allows us to have more meaningful careers. Even in my career, I paid off my student loans rather aggressively. Thank you to the Army, which we'll talk about in another session. And because my student loans were paid off, I had more flexibility to take risk and pursue non-clinical things that had much higher upside. And I wouldn't have been able to do that if I was buried in student debt and living paycheck to paycheck. So financial discipline in my life has allowed me to make a lot of big steps that maybe wouldn't have been there. So Frank, thank you so much. This was amazing. And thank you, MedPro Financials. They are the title sponsor of this conference. And because of Frank and MedPro, this is why we're able to offer this conference completely free to attendees. So I'm really appreciative of it, Frank. The goal of this has always been to try and distribute this education and information as widely as possible. And your support has allowed us to do that. Yeah. So I do encourage you to reach out to Frank if you have any additional questions, but otherwise we're going to keep moving and now move into the afternoon sessions.
Thanks so much. Appreciate you guys. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, Frank.